Historical Persona Essay, Martin Luther King Jr. Nowadays, I am recognized as one of the most important public figures in history. Some of my greatest achievements are leading the American Civil Rights Movement in the mid-1950s that fought against racial segregation and discrimination, leading the Montgomery bus boycott, and, along with founding the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I'm also quite known for my famous I Have a Dream speech that altered the course of history. It all began on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, where my mother, Alberta Williams King, whom I described the best mother in the world, gave birth to me, Michael King Jr. She was an incredible woman who was the backbone of my knowledge and activism, as well as helped shape my mind. Besides her being a choir director of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, she was also the organist for the Women's Auxiliary of the National Baptist Convention from 1950 till 1962. My father served as a pastor at the Ebenezer Church from 1931 till 1975. He was a missionary and an early figure in the civil rights movement. I came from a long line of Christians who provided vital advice and regular spiritual teachings, which was also why I handled many issues in our society so well. I had two siblings, an older sister, Christine King Ferris, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel King, whom I adored a whole lot. Overall, we lived in a comfortable middle-class family steeped in the tradition of the Southern Black ministry. My father was a strict man and even used whippings as a form of discipline. Might sound strange nowadays, but back then it was considered quite normal and was one of many reasons why I turned out to always keep my head forward, focused, concentrated, and fight for what I needed until I received it. My mother was a remarkable woman who instilled self-respect into me and my siblings, and also provided piano lessons for us. In 1934, at the beaming age of 5, I joined David T. Howard Elementary School, but even before attending it, my persuasive mother began teaching me to read and write. Around that time, I was also very good friends with a boy who happened to be white. When I joined school, he told me his father had forbade him to play with me, and my heart sank considering he was one of my closest friends. Since that little incident, I discovered the cruel, downright despicable side of humans, and from that moment on, I was determined to hate every white person. On a brighter note, still at around age 5, I attended an international conference with my father in Germany, where I learned all about the Protestant Reformation leader Martin Luther. I was extremely impressed with him and inspired by his deeds of the 16th century, so my father decided to change my name from Michael to Martin Luther. Throughout my school life, thanks to my endearing parents, I was ahead of my peers, even skipped a few grades, and graduated at the age of 15 from Booker T. Washington High School, and went on to attend Morehouse College. There I met the college's president, Dr. Benjamin E., my spiritual mentor, with whom I developed a strong bond with that continued until my death. I graduated in 1948 at the age of 19 with a BA in sociology. The same year, I began studying in the Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, and graduated in 1951 with the Bachelor of Divinity degree, plus was given the role of valedictorian. Lastly, the same year, I began my graduate studies in Boston University in systematic theology and graduated in 1955 with a doctorate in systematic theology. My hate for white people slowly went away throughout those years, as I've met countless people who were different races and proved that it's wrong to show hatred towards an entire race because of an incident from my childhood. As long as we have equality, there will be peace. I also met my brilliant and supportive wife, Coretta Scott, in the early 1950s, and we got married on June 18th in 1953 near Marion, Alabama. Me and Coretta had 4 wonderful, bright children whom we adored a whole lot. One can definitely tell that many white Americans were so used to the fact that black Americans were considered lower class, so when I decided to speak up for them, it was no surprise that the white Americans disliked it. This was direct proof of how America and many parts of the world had issues like racial segregation, discrimination, and so forth. With the help and guidance of one of my role models, Mahatma Gandhi, I learned a lot about nonviolent protests and how these protests can offer anyone the opportunity to become involved and have a voice. One of the biggest boycotts I've helped organize was the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. An incident triggered this boycott by Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement, who was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus. Although it took long months, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional. The boycott was a success. In hopes of redeeming the soul of America, I helped organize and lead the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which focused on citizenship schools and efforts to desegregate individual cities like Albany, for example, and it also played key roles in the March on Washington in 1963. I've been arrested a total of 29 times, and it was mostly because of my acts of civil disobedience while fighting for civil rights and coordinating protests as well as sit ins. One of my most memorable arrests was on April 12, 1963, in Birmingham for violating the anti protest injunction. From the Birmingham jail, I wrote a letter which was considered the most important written document of the civil rights era. The letter was considered as a long road to freedom in a movement that was largely centered around actions and spoken words. It's also considered a classic work of protest literature. On August 28, 1963, during the famous March on Washington for jobs and freedom, I gave my iconic speech, I Have a Dream. And to be honest, I mostly improvised it, but it left quite a remarkable impact since people are still discussing it 50 years later. This speech was a call for equality and freedom, and I feel quite content about the fact that this speech actually made a change and influenced the federal government to take direct actions to realize racial equality. Later in 1964, I spoke for Black Americans by helping bring about the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Act of 1965, and these bills helped them access civil rights across the country. Overall, I did my best to advocate for peaceful approaches to some of society's biggest problems through nonviolent protests and sit-ins. In 1964, at the age of 35, I was the youngest man to have received the Nobel Peace Prize. I later announced that I would turn over the prize money of $54,123 to the furtherance of the civil rights movement. At the early age of 39, on April 4, 1968, I was assassinated by James Earl Ray, who unfortunately claimed it was because of hatred. I'm honored and proud to say that I left such an enormous impact, as well as have an entire day dedicated to me. There were rough days that occurred. I came close to losing faith and hope to make a change, but because I realized that racial segregation wouldn't go away until someone would finally do something about it, I couldn't give up. Organizing multiple protests, sit-ins, and giving over 2,500 public speeches, I helped many Black Americans feel safe and heard. Unfortunately, as for white Americans, they didn't approve much of my quest for Black liberation, but years after my death, they began accepting it. To this day, I continue inspiring people to work towards a more just and equitable world. Looking back at everything I've achieved, I'm surprised that I haven't given up. I guess I really lived by the fact that we must accept finite disappointment but never lose infinite hope. It really did strive me to keep going because there was always an infinite number of things I could do to bring peace and equality. I hope for the world to continue living by these words, and if it will, can you imagine how much more peaceful the world would be?